Hi, and welcome to Lights of the Round Table. My name is Susanna, and this is going to be part 2 with Kirk from Kirk's Law Corner concerning the podcast we had with Darren Brunson and some of the questions that you, the audience, posed. So please stick around and listen.
Commander-in-Chief, Attorney General. That is a rank in the military. Governor, Commander-in-Chief. That is a rank in the military. Under the governor in the states, right, our country, those are admiralty jurisdiction.
Right.
So that's the jurisdiction they bind themselves to when they become a member of the legislative, executive, or judicial branch. You're binding yourself to admiralty jurisdiction.
Right. Well, so much for trying to do the comments on the Brunson case, because it's definitely it's like, what can we do? So when somebody says, so for example, the comments are, we have no constitution that is, and this comes from Leslie. She actually says, we have no constitution that is enforced. This case, and she's right on that statement.
No, she's not.
We have no constitution that is enforced.
Nope.
This case is vitally important, she says.
Okay.
Without going too much to lecture, because I want to move on, but Kirk, how can we simplify it? Because the thing is that people say, well, you take an oath to protect the Constitution. Whether we are de facto or not, they're still taking an oath to protect our Constitution. And they're not. The Supreme Court already stated that they're not. They don't care because they are playing the rules. They are under de facto. And so how are we going to...
No. That's not what the Supreme Court said.
No. Well, you're right.
Okay. We have to comprehend what was actually before the Supreme Court. The case was not before the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court is not a trial court.
They won't listen to it. They won't consider it.
The Supreme Court is not a trial court. Can you have a trial by jury in the Supreme Court of the United States of America? No, it is not a trial court. That is not the matter before the court. The matter before the Supreme Court was a writ of certiorari.
Right.
It is essentially a writ of review, a form of an appeal. And it asked the simple question, did the lower court, the trial court, make any errors? That's it.
And they said no.
The lower court did not, the trial court, did not make any error in saying that there was a lack of standing and a lack of subject matter jurisdiction because the judicial branch does not have subject matter jurisdiction regarding elections. This is a political argument, not a judicial one. Article 4, Section 4, and the common law, parliamentary practice, common law dictates anything to do with elections is an election petition. That's that from the common law, our rights that dictate that we go to the legislative branch for the redress of grievances, not the judicial. Separation of powers. So, from parliamentary practice, there's called an election petition. That petition is supposed to go to the legislative branch to provide oversight of the executive branch executing the laws regarding the statutes regarding how an election is to be carried out. See, when we talk about executing the law created by the legislature, that goes over to the executive branch to be executed. And the legislature provides oversight of that which they create. See, the law of creation here. Who's the creator? The sovereign body politic. We delegated those powers by Constitution to the legislature. So the legislature has subject matter jurisdiction, not the judicial, because of the laws of creation dictate this. And the fundamental principle, the separation of powers doctrine, the judicial branch cannot claim and exercise a power that properly belongs to the legislative branch. Fundamentally and principally, 2 + 2 = 4. The legislature has this power, not the judicial.
Okay. And you made that very clear last time.
If the legislature does not do its job, there's a couple different things. Technically three different avenues that can be done. Again, the writ of mandamus to the judicial branch, the Supreme Court of the state, the country. Okay, that is a writ of mandamus, a mandate, is to say, hey, these guys failed to perform their duties based on my election petition that I filed with the legislature and demanded them do an investigation to verify my claims of election fraud. That the executive branch stepped outside of its scope and authority per the laws of its creation and its duties to perform. And then I'm coming to the judicial branch to make it mandatory that the legislative branch discharge the duties of that office to do the investigation. Now we have an order from the judicial branch ordering the legislature to do their job. And if they don't, that is contempt of court. Now we got the legislative branch on the hook, but then this becomes what? Internal insurrection. That's what domestic violence is. This is what the militia is for, is to protect us from internal insurrection. That's the domestic violence, is to overthrow or subvert the laws of its own creation and war against the people. That's that's happening. And to keep us from turning us back into a monarchy, which is when you go down the road on Luther versus Borden and Texas v. White under Article 4, Section 4, what the intent of the founders who created Article 4, Section 4 is for, which again dictates the process. It says on application of the legislature or the executive, right, for domestic violence. This is internal insurrection. Nowhere does it say judicial there. Right. Due process of law dictates this process.
So Carrie Lake's in Carrie Lake's gosh, I can't even talk anymore. But in Carrie Lake's case, who does she go to? She just does everything in Arizona, right? Through her legislative body, right? Petition, mandamus,
yep.
Mandamus. And so if that doesn't go through, then?
See, the thing is, where is her petition? See, that's the woman who has standing. She was the candidate-elect. She has been harmed by fraud.
Right.
She is the one that has standing to claim a right to a cause of action, to demand an investigation to verify her claims that there is fraud. Now, who has subject matter jurisdiction over elections? Well, the common law, before the Constitution, says that's an election petition. And we petition the legislature for the redress of that grievance because that's the jurisdiction. Common law dictates that the legislature, per the Constitution, has the power to do investigations.
Okay.
And actually, that's the common law that dictates that. But, yes.
I wanted to, so I think that we covered this. Now, let me ask you, there were a couple of comments in the going back to the Brunson day that we did a podcast. One of them said, and listen, she says, I'm from Canada, and I'm just curious if under the Executive Order 13818, that Kirk mentioned, if my participation in anything would be valid in that I have been subject to the human rights abuse and corruption stated in the order. So that I thought that was an interesting question. And she's from Canada. Can this be applied to her?
Well, the interesting thing about that particular executive order is that it is, in fact, a worldwide executive order. We are at World War. This is World War III.
Okay.
But I'll explain it like this. This is a revolutionary war worldwide on a grand scale. And if we're not at World War, how in the heck did Trump and the Trump administration do treaties of peace with all these other nation countries? Logic and reason here. You can't do a treaty of peace if you're not at war. Because we've been in this perpetual war since essentially 1863.
Right. So there's dismantling of
there's
governments.
been no treaty of peace. Where's the treaty of peace?
So how do we? I know. So then how do we? So now you also mentioned that 10 days. If anybody wants to do a petition and go through the process that you're saying through the common law, applying common law processes and rules and regulations, you said that it would more or less take 10 days. I don't know. Is that true? Wrong? I mean, has this been tested?
Right. So this is the thing. I'm not sure of the timeline, but technically speaking, the fundamental principle that justice is to be without sale, denial, or delay. Okay. But think about what they would actually have to do. It's going to take some time, right? And to try to impose on them 10 days, maybe it's 10 days to take action on the petition. Again, I have not been able to find where it specifically states a certain amount of days to come to conclusion. But a lot of times, the legislative body will say, okay, we received your election petition. We're going to initiate a committee to do an investigation. And just a perfect example, the Kavanaugh hearings for appointing Kavanaugh and selecting him, however you want to, voting to put him in as a Supreme Court justice.
Mm-hmm.
And when what was that woman's name? Anyway, she claimed that he had supposedly inappropriately touched her some point in time, way back, right? Okay, see how far back this can go, right? But what did they do? Okay, everything puts on hold, and we'll have the FBI go do an investigation to verify your claims that this happened. Okay, they had the Senate gave them 14 days to go do their investigation. So that's the laws of creation there, creating the investigation, what the terms and conditions of the investigation is, who was to do it, and how long they got. Okay, well, she gave some of her witnesses to corroborate her story, and they came back and said, look, we did our investigation. We interviewed these people that she gave us, and then a couple of other people that was found through these other witnesses, and we could not corroborate her story. In other words, we couldn't find any facts, evidence, witnesses that could testify to the truth of the veracity of her claims. Therefore, there's no evidence to support her claims. You got to have two witnesses to the same overt act. There was none. So that's the process there, showing us, and I honestly think that was all done to show us how this is supposed to work.
Mm-hmm.
Due process of law, fair process. And that was the process that was due to him.
Yeah. There's a lot. Yeah. And that has been very revealing. We've been shown a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of truth at the same time. We just have to learn which ones are those. So then going back to another question from one of the viewers says, couldn't you get the judge on standing to recognize that other judges in some states changed laws, which is an illegal act, and the states didn't stop them? Then with the legislatures in the federal government demanding an investigation, which essentially is the people, and was denied and ignored. So now, wouldn't they have the authority to do something? Well, I think we've already touched some of those points, but maybe you can just quickly reiterate without getting. So couldn't you get a judge on standing to recognize that other judges in some states changed the laws?
Okay. So essentially what did happen was, because of this so-called state of emergency declared by proclamations by the governors, except for one, South Dakota. She did not declare a state of emergency. And what did she say the reason why? Because we do not need the money. It's all about money. Number two, when the governor declared the state of emergency by proclamation for some sort of communicable disease, alleged communicable disease, that's not a state of emergency, but I don't want to go too far. So, state of emergency declared by proclamation, okay? Then the governor, acting as governor under the executive branch, fundamentally altered the election statutes or policy regarding elections that's done by the legislative branch. So he subverted the laws of creation and exercised power he doesn't have, which, if people want to kind of get a picture of all this, go read the English Bill of Rights of 1689. It's the same thing, that the head of the executive branch usurped their powers, suspended certain laws, sound familiar? And took actions. Okay, so that's what happened again. And it was all a cover-up because they knew that they lost back in 2016 with Trump. They weren't expecting to lose. And so this time, 4 years, 5 years later, people are a lot more awake than they were in 2016. And so they were seriously concerned that Trump was going to win the election and be able to continue on with what was going on, what still is going on, whether he got elected as president of a corporation or not. That's irrelevant. So it wasn't the judges that altered the statutes. It was the governors, the executive branch. Now, what could have been done there is, yes, one, go to the judicial branch, but you're suing who? You're suing the governor,
yeah,
for his usurpation of power. But whoa, wait a minute. The law dictates that's impeachment. That's got to be done in the House. So again, you got to go to the legislative branch for impeachment. The judicial branch doesn't have that. All power of impeachment is in the House. All trials for impeachment is in the Senate. And it only goes no further than removal from office, but may be subject to criminal charges later. Oh, so you got to do that. See, this is why due process of law, depending on who it is, what body of law applies to them that they're bound by, that we have to follow. So the governor is bound by the Constitution. The Constitution says, in order to remove me from office, you got to go over here to the House, do articles of impeachment. Then the House goes to the Senate side. They prosecute their claims. And when it's the governor, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court comes over to the Court of Justice and presides in the House of Justice. That's the, in some of the older constitutions, the beginning was the General Assembly and the General Court. That court is the Court of Justice, not courts of law. That's over there, Article 3, Section 2, suits in law and equity under admiralty jurisdiction. No, this is part of our law of the land, supreme law of the land, the common law that dictates this process that the governor swore an oath to be bound by. And we have a duty to follow that process that's due to the man acting as governor, to go to the legislative branch, impeach him in trial in the Senate, remove him from office. Then now he can be, back to the common law, suits at common law, and sue the man, because that's what strips them of their immunity from being sued. That's how you remove their immunity. And see, the reason why our founders built it this way is because of what the king and his men were doing to the legislators at the time. They were dissolving the entire houses, and the king was sending in new guys, and they started doing these pretended acts of legislation who were not elected by the people themselves. So our founders said, well, here's the remedy for that. You're going to have to go through an impeachment process to remove these guys from duty to protect themselves from tyrants.
Okay.
See, people don't comprehend why these things are there. They're for protections of us,
Correct.
The people, our nation, our form of government.
Dan,
That's why that process was put in place.
Kirk, I feel your
was
passion coming through.
to thwart tyrants and their tyranny.
So well said. So my last question, because I don't want to drag, but it's actually quite informative and what a lesson. So one person says, well, the military is the only way. Could that be true? I mean, here we are, we're listening to you, we can see the passion, and you're telling us how to go about it. And yet, some people are going to negate and say, no, we're still waiting for the military because I heard from Q and he's coming to save us all. So, not that I don't like those Q drops, please forgive me there, but with due respect to some, let's go back to the law. How do we convince the people that we need to actually stand up for ourselves, assemble, or do whatever it is that we need to do in order for the military, when they clean up their act, be able to say, all right, we're waiting for a republic. Where is it? The true republic, I guess, not the de facto, the true republic. And now you're telling us that we still have to assemble. So there's a lot of things that are happening that we need to do if we want to retake our country, because one is to retake our country and the other one is to become a country, and we're not even there. So what this question says is the military is the only way. Could that be true?
Well, I would disagree on the point of the only way. And that's due to lack of knowledge, right? We're not supposed to I want to say retort, but we're not supposed to use force and violence against our fellow man, right? We're supposed to be a civilized society, and we follow a certain process that is due. In the end, yes, but that's why the First Amendment, or Article the First of the Bill of Rights, is the right to petition government for the redress of grievances. Second is arms. So we must exhaust all other remedies from the letter of the law, due process of law, first, before we can get to the second, which is actually the people, the militia, the unorganized by the de facto government, which is that duty that's from ancient law. You know, the merchant marines were created in 1553 as the civil power that the Constitution refers to as the military subordinate to the civil power. That's even, and I showed it just the other night on the show, Monday Night Law.
Yeah.
That proclamation, right in May of 2017, talking about the merchant marines. All right. So don't think for one second that Trump, the brilliant man, highly intelligent man that he is, doesn't already know this, because he's already put it out there for us to read it. But back to the question, it's not the only way. We have to follow the steps to get there to enforce the law. So again, step by step. A lot of people will use this excuse. Well, they're all corrupt. They're all corrupt. That's not an excuse not to claim and exercise your right following due process of law. That's self-defeating, and it's an excuse because you have lack of knowledge. And forgive me for pointing that out the way it is. Might sound harsh, but that is the reality here. We don't know our rights. We're not following due process of law. This goes right back to the Declaration of Independence, right? Let me see if I can pull that up just real quick. Because this is exactly our state of being here, wallowing in our own self-pity and expecting somebody else to do this for us.
I learned that with you, one needs to have time, because there's such wealth of information and you do take your time. So I really appreciate your time with us. And educating us in many, many ways.
Yep. Well, thank you. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, and a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. This is the Declaration of Independence declaring the causes for the separation. This is not the document that separates us from Great Britain. That is the Lee's Resolution. But we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator, the sovereign, with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Not everybody is governed by the Constitution. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation. There's that. See these words coming right out of the Law of Nations? All of these, right out of the Law of Nations, on such principles and organizing. Back to that first primitive law of nature, when man is properly organized. Here it is, right here. Organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect what? Their safety and happiness. Safety in transporting their goods in trade, and securing their happiness in doing that. That's the fundamental principle of government. Now, this is what I'm talking about here. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. That's where we're at. People are making up excuses for not claiming and exercising our rights, following the principles of law. They're using it as an excuse. They would much rather sit there and wallow in their own self-pity and suffer than educate themselves in following the letter of the law as the rights dictate the process, and follow that. Because what does it say? But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Now, when we get down here, can't remember. Let's see. Do this. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which we may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. What does it say? We cannot claim that we're under absolute despotism and take up arms to defend ourselves until after we followed the law and claimed our right to petition for the redress of grievances.
And that's what Trump
That's not
is
absolute despotism. We're just under despotism.
Right.
Where's the petitions? Show me the man who filed the election petition. Show me the man who followed due process of law. I want to see that evidence.
Okay.
There is none.
Right.
Because they didn't.
Well,
so we can't go to the military as our only way until we follow the civilized way without the use of force and violence. That's what the petition does in a most humble terms. We must humble ourselves and say, look, this isn't right. Will you please do an investigation into this and verify whether this was lawful or not? If it wasn't lawful, then hold them responsible through due process of law. We would have to vacate it or verify the legitimate ballots and redeclare the outcome of the election. Or we just abolish it all and we have to do a new election. Well, at this time, for the 2020 elections, way too far and gone now. All we can do is hold the ones that were involved responsible. But the most closest example that we can get here to this process being followed was Arizona.
Is there a time limit that we can petition for this in Arizona?
As far as I know, it's supposed to be done right away. Right? You're supposed to contest the election by the one who is injured, harmed by the fraud.
But she's going through the judiciary. Yeah, but she's going through the judiciary process and not through the legislature. So is there a time constraint or not at this point?
Again, I cannot honestly answer that question because I do not know about the timeline on that. But what I do know is that fraud vitiates everything from its inception, void ab initio. And U.S. versus Throckmorton says it could be 10 years down the road when you discover this fraud, and it will vitiate it even 10 years later.
Okay.
Because fraud is fraud is fraud is fraud. It's void for any effect. Where the wheels fell off the wagon, that wagon stops. It doesn't go any further. Them horses cannot continue to pull a wagon when the wheels fall off of it. So we got to go back to where the wheels fell off the wagon, and everything after that is void for any effect. So it's just a matter of claiming you're right, but see, we have a maxim of law here. A lazy man loses. Laches occurs. If the man or woman that has standing doesn't claim their right to a cause of action and follow due process of law, you waive your right.
Okay.
Let's keep it fair.
Yeah. So let's put it this way, Kirk. It seems to me, how can we get in touch with Kari Lake and her people? How can we try this? Because at this point, we have to cover, like you just said, we have to do everything possible to, I cannot even think anymore, to exhaust our possibilities in a civil way. So, do you have a contact? Can anybody contact you if they're listening to this? That would like to, that says, hey, I can put you in contact with so and so and so and so, and let's make this happen. And with that, yes, that's one question. My second question, lastly, is by doing so, what happens to the state of government then? It disassembles. What happens then? If you go through your process, your suggestion and idea, then let's say it goes to legislature, then everything can come down, and that can happen really quickly, and we don't have to deal with the judiciary branch of government. Okay, that's a quick process.
The first part of the answer is Kirk@kirkslawcorner.com. That's an email that you can contact me regarding Kari Lake and the election process. Now, I would like to reiterate that there is standing by the registered voters, right? So the registered voters, and I know people like to go, oh, well, that's part of the corporation. Well, it's government de facto. until the lazy people get off their butt and reassemble the government de jure, they're providing these essential governmental services, and this is the process that is due, and this is our standing as per the government de facto. We cannot sit here on our haunches and not do anything. Due process of law still applies. The rights still apply. They're just providing these essential services. So fraud is fraud is fraud is fraud. The ones that have standing are the registered voters. So the registered voters need to come together and do an election petition and demand an investigation to verify their claims that there's election fraud, that there were unlawful ballots, there were counterfeit ballots, that the mail-in ballots were unlawful or not verified properly, right? They're counterfeit ballots, they're fraudulent ballots. Somebody's, did you verify those signature that belongs to a registered voter? And did you toss out all the ones that aren't verifiable if we're going to do mail-in ballots? But there again, this violates basic fundamental principles of the election process, where all of the people are supposed to show up and cast their ballot. Right? That's how that's supposed to work fundamentally and principally from the inception of our republic. But this was all done under the guise of a state of emergency. Oh, we got this communicable disease. Everybody can just do mail-in ballots, so we can construct this fraud and get away with it. Well, let's verify that stuff. You know, like was talked about there in Arizona, there was like way too many ballots cast versus the amount of registered voters. Mm-hmm. And then did we even verify the voter registration? They're supposed to do that first, right? Here's the registered polls or registered voters who, and then remove people off there that have recently deceased, passed away. You got to remove them from the ballot rolls. So you get a proper number of legitimate voters verified, and that's your base. And then one ballot per one man. That's the way that's supposed to work. Right of suffrage. The right of suffrage is the right that we would claim that's being deprived by the executive branch, who conspired to deprive the right of suffrage by fundamentally altering how that's supposed to be carried out and actively engaged in fraud. Counterfeit ballots. Did you verify that those ballots all had the proper watermark on it? Then that's what we get down to. Let's separate the fraudulent counterfeit ballots, the unlawful ballots, from the legitimate ones, the lawful ones, and we count the lawful ones, and that's the results of the election. That's what they need to report. Now, Arizona did do that. Did they not?
They did, yeah.
Sure did. Imagine that. It was the legislature. But here's the problem. A lot of it is they don't even know how this process is supposed to work right from the Constitution itself. So they didn't even finish following due. They said, oh, well, we sent that over to the executive branch for prosecution. No, that's articles of impeachment. That's the power belonging to the legislative branch. And then if we're going to talk about internal insurrection, then the legislative branch should have went to the commander-in-chief and said, hey, oh, wait, you're the one that did it. You're the one that's part of it. So now we got to go federal commander-in-chief for internal insurrection pursuant to Article 4, Section 4, the supreme law of the land, where the state constitution says through impeachment, which they could do, right? They could impeach the governor and all of the elected officials under there, because impeachment's for elected officials. Now, we can go straight criminal for the non-elected officials. But then again, that would go to the commander-in-chief state level, Well, if the commander-in-chief in the state level is the corrupt one, you got to go to the supreme commander-in-chief, which the governors are under the president or the supreme commander-in-chief over all of it. That's our federalism. That's how our form of government works, per Article 4, Section 4, which our founders debated in the Constitutional Convention, is saying, look, we got to be able to provide oversight from an individual state turning itself back into a monarchy. And this is the rabbit hole under Article 4, Section 4. The reason why it's that way and that process is there is so that even if one individual state turned itself back into a monarchy, that the federalism, the commander-in-chief, could come in and say, nope, that's not, I have a duty here to guarantee a republican form of government to the people of the territory. You're the government, the state of being, state there, the body politic. You're acting outside of the emoluments of your office. And you're under me, governor, as commander-in-chief of the organized militia of the state. I have a duty to provide oversight and to hold him responsible under admiralty jurisdiction. That's how that's supposed to work.
Okay, and one last question then, and we'll call it quits. How many petitions do you need in order to bring down the government? I guess it's the de facto. That was one of the questions. Do we need one? Do we need a whole bunch of people? What would it take for us to do what you're proposing? You're going through your logic and going through your educated logic and processes and rules and following what you just said. How many of us would it take to do this and bring the de facto down, or start bringing all the de factos in each state down?
Three-part answer. One,
okay.
The 2020 election, Executive Order 13848. Trump already set this in motion clear back in September of 2018 because he knew about the election fraud in the 2016 election. So he did preemptory, right? He's seen the writing on the wall. Mm-hmm. As commander-in-chief, the executive to execute the law is an executive order from the commander-in-chief to execute the law, the military. Okay? To do an investigation because he knew Congress wouldn't assemble. He knew they wouldn't do their job. So this is our commander-in-chief preemptorily providing protections because that's his duties, because that's the last man standing. In other words, it goes back to a civil war by the people, the militia, the unorganized by government, the civil power. So Trump did that executive order, and he came out and said, look, don't worry. We have it all. So don't worry about the 2020 election. Seriously, folks. It's already being handled. I can tell you that right now. Now, the second part. How many people for a petition in the state level? One. This is an individual right to petition, to demand the redress of grievances, to demand relief. What's the remedy and relief? Follow the process. Even if it's one voter. But the more you have signing that one petition, so one petition for one grievance. If the grievance is the right of suffrage has been deprived, that's what needs to be in the election petition, that the right of suffrage has been deprived. And that's it. And then prayer for relief. And all of the undersigners here are demanding the legislature of the state to discharge the duties of that office as we instruct them. Okay. Part 3. We can go to Congress if the state level doesn't. Again, part of Article 4, Section 4 is to guarantee that Republican form of government. Is this right? Is this Republican in character or conduct or not, Congress? Because you're the one that approved this state to join the Union based on the Organic Act that you created. Did they step outside the organic law of its creation? and subvert the laws of its own creation, which is internal insurrection, domestic violence, and overthrow the laws of its creation in war against the people or not? And if so, that's a declaration of war. Congress is the only one that has the power to do declarations of war as internal insurrection, directing the commander-in-chief to execute the law and call forth the militia to protect us from internal insurrection. That's the process.
So it's not a coincidence then. Would you say that we have the Speaker of the House, McCarthy, in our... I mean, because there's a couple of things now that you're mentioning, and I know just before Christmas, I think, or just when the Brunson case was getting very popular, even the president of the, even Trump was talking about oath, you know, the importance of oath. And it was all about this, right? And so there had been some messages, and of course everything has dissipated because now the Supreme Court has says, we're waiting now. Let's see what the Brunsons do. With due respect, may they continue their path. However, it's really interesting how after 15 votes, which was really to show people how this whole Congress thing works, and it was more of a show, I think, how they've been able to reel back McCarthy, and apparently McCarthy now has to do whatever we want to do, or else he's booted out, something like that, right? So very interesting that he's been the puppet of some very influential and very patriotic Congress representatives, you know, Matt Gaetz, Jim Jordan. I mean, we got some we got some bulldozers over there, you know, they're ready to just, and I just find it interesting because now you mentioned all of this and everything is coming together, because not to worry, if this doesn't work, we can still go to Congress, and guess what? Speaker of the House is right now under our bailiwick, is under us. So can that work? Is that what happens? Can we make it happen then? It goes to the, because we have the Senate. We also have the Senate, right?
Yes.
So okay.
This is great. Okay. So what I've been talking about for a while now, that this election cycle was the change of the guards. The Declaration of Independence talks about. Now, does the president acting as commander-in-chief come in and just take all these people out? They have it all. Sure. But what would we be left with? Oh, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in my mind, this is the game of chess. Okay. Trump's playing that 4D chess, 5D chess, whatever you want to call it. So there's different levels and planes going on all at the same time here, but it's all just one game. So what I've dubbed this was the change of the guards, this last election cycle here, right now. Again, here in Idaho, 51% of our House and Senate has changed over. That's just a hair over half. How do we not see that as a change of the guards?
Yeah.
Look at what happened in Congress. Trump's like, hey, that's not bad odds. How many? I can't remember exact numbers. Well over 200 some people that he recommended, endorsed.
Correct.
For whatever office.
Right. And we got the majority of the House, which
his percentage is very small.
Yes, but he got it.
Right. So most of everybody he nominated, wanted in there, and endorsed made it. The change of the guards. Now, we're seeing things like, oh, we're going to do a committee for an investigation on origins of COVID-19. Oh, we're going to abolish the IRS. Oh, we're going to abolish the Federal Reserve. Wait a minute. This is the change of the guards. Again, why I keep saying, why I'm coming now this year with my petitions, stuff I've been holding back on. Because one, there were certain people in my state legislature, I didn't want them to get in trouble because I like them. I think they're good, patriotic people. And so I didn't want them to get wrapped up in some of this stuff. Well, now that things have changed, and everybody's like, well, they're new. So they haven't had a chance to get brainwashed thinking that that's how it's supposed to be. And a man like me is going to come in and go, okay, I get that nobody really knows this stuff. I've been studying it for a few years now, and I get it. Here's what it says. We need to be following this process, and I'm going to claim and exercise my right, my powers, and I'm going to instruct you to discharge the duties of your office. Let's get her done. This is the process that is due. This is how it works, because even in my de facto constitution, but this is the right, the Declaration of Rights, the right to peaceably assemble, to consult for our common good, and to instruct our representatives. Okay, so that means how are we going to instruct them if we don't know the law and can't speak the law? How are we going to instruct them? This is our power. How are we going to claim and exercise this power if we don't know it? It's completely illogical. We can't get to 2 + 2 = 4 when we don't even have the plus sign. Nobody knows the principles. How are we going to get to the correct answer that dictates the correct answer by following the process, the principles of our Republican form of government and our rights as the law, the common law that dictates the process? We can't get to 4 without all of this first. So I'm begging the people out there to learn how to do this.
Yeah, it's very simple, apparently. It can be done.
It can be.
It can be done. Well, I'll tell you, Kirk, it's always amazing to have you. I know that we just started talking about this, but it's been an intensive 2 weeks that I've met you, and we've been talking, you and others like us, talking to you, and boy, it's an honor to have you here. And I was just going to say one more thing, and I guess I need food for thought, because I need food. I totally forgot what I was going to say. Oh, yes. One more thing. How many people like yourself that know the common law, that have studied? I mean, you must have buddies. I mean, it cannot be only you, Kirk, that really know. I mean, it sounds to me like from the few people I've talked to, they always point at you. And I'm going, really? That small of a circle? Kirk, come on. You must have some friends that are very much as passionate. No? All right. America, you just heard it.
I have had over the years, even clear back to when I started doing lives on Facebook in 2017. The man that wanted to produce my shows, he's like, you realize that nobody else knows this stuff, and what you're teaching, nobody is teaching. And that was Chris and myself, right? And some of this, the basic stuff about petitioning the legislature, I learned from Chris, and we sat down and learned side by side on this. Mason's Manual Legislative Procedure, I discovered that after he says, well, yeah, there's rules of procedure in the legislature. I'm like, what are you talking about, rules of procedure in the legislature? I'll be darned. Then I found that in there it says, House Rule 75 there. Oh, well, we go by the Mason's Manual Legislative Procedure. Like, what the heck is this? First I was Masons? Freemasons? No, his name is George Mason. Whether he was a Mason or not, but it was based off his name. We'll all be darned. And I went and found this 1953 PDF version of Mason's Manual Legislative Procedure, and I immediately broke that sucker out and started teaching people on the show right from it as I'm reading and learning from it. Right? So this isn't, I already had this knowledge, right? I learned live reading it. I mean, I read some of it before, but I'm like, this is so important. We got to get this out there, because this is how we exercise political power. This is how we alter, reform, or abolish anything at any time we deem it necessary. Now, granted, there's the right of jury nullification, but that requires the common law courts to be reassembled. The common law grand jury, we don't have that. We're dealing with government de facto, providing these essential services until we reassemble. But we can still claim and exercise this political power through a petition into the legislature. Right.
And I know that then you have a vestry who is so knowledgeable, putting together what it is, a framework together for the assemblies. And I know there's a small group of great American patriots assembling and trying to put the framework and structuring everything. So when that moment comes that we can just get rid of our de facto government, we at least have assemblies and we can work and put all the framework and start working, getting all those positions and offices and everything. So I know that we'll bring you back with Destry probably and some other people to explain to us this process, because that homework needs to be done also. And if we can do this as we are learning everything else, I think that pretty soon we can assist and aid the military when the time is due, and at least we are assembled. And then we say, hey, guess what? We did our homework. We can do it. Let's do it. Mm-hmm. And we can expedite the process. So thank you so much, Seth, for everything. And yes, go ahead.
And that is the national-assembly.net, where they're teaching that stuff.
Yeah.
And their weekly call is on Thursday nights. I've been on there for quite some time with them, and when I first found them, I'm like, oh, this is it, right? Carl Miller and that kind of stuff. But the fact is they've already done, like Michigan. Destry was part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 2012, when Carl Miller was still with us and around, he was part of this stuff. So this is the stuff that Carl Miller referenced that we need to be learning and doing, who ultimately is really my only one mentor that I watched and learned from. But once I got to the point of, well, somebody ought to do something about this, be a somebody, do something about it. Well, I can't do anything until I learn. Imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what's ongoing right now. Their weekly call, and they'll have it's an education. National-assembly.net is the education. Okay, but they have their business, just like Kirk's Law Corner LLC. So they have their business meeting first, part of the call. Old business, new business. And then after that's concluded, then we move on to the education side of the call on Thursday nights.
I see.
This is where we're trying to answer questions, Q&A, teach a little bit, and try to break this down into small little segments every week, but there's a plethora of information there to read on the national-assembly.net website. Read to your heart's content. The other part is I've just started all that on Telegram, as well as my live Monday Night Laws on Rumble, Facebook, and sometimes on YouTube and Telegram. Now I've started a specific thing just on Telegram, ALC American Patriots MC. And then from there, I've created individual state channels for all of the people to come together and start learning. I want to start teaching just the petition process right now, because it's ripe for the picking. And then try to drive people over to the national-assembly.net stuff on Thursday nights to get that education, to reassemble that over there.
Perfect.
While I teach this over here.
Wow. That's so when do you eat, sleep, or do anything else, right? Because I've been doing this myself, and there's so much to absorb in such little time. I mean, sometimes you have to read 2 or 3 times the same page to comprehend what you're trying to read. But it's so educational. It's so fun to see such passion coming. And I know that the assemblies, there's so many others that I'm meeting that are as passionate as you. So I hope to bring you back. I'll be making little bits and pieces over here. So maybe we can have it in bit size so people can comprehend, and maybe put it through social media, and I'll share that with you. So thank you so much, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
All right. God bless. Thank you.
God bless.